Fiz-Zmien,
Lura Fiz-Zmien,
pajjiż motiħor mill-lina fien titħabbek miegħu bla ma trid u kemm nixtieq ara l-ftit li jerġa' dak iż-żmien mill-ġdid. Album ritratti lura Fiz-Zmien,
Lura Fiz-Zmien,
pajjiż motiħor mill-lina fien titħabbek miegħu bla ma trid u kemm nixtieq ara l-ftit li jerġa' dak iż-żmien mill-ġdid. Li jerġa' dak iż-żmien mill-ġdid.
Mit-tarf ta' runway l-antika ġewwa Luqa, insalmilkom u nilqakom għal edizzjoni oħra tal-programm Lura Fiz-Zmien. Jekk inti kont taħdem mas servizzi Ingliżi b'mod speċjali mal-qawwa tal-ajru, l-RAF, il-Royal Air Force, żgur li dal-programm se jkun ta' interess kbir għalik. Ftit ta' programmi ilu u rejnikom dokumentarju tkellimna dwar l-Ordni ta' San Juan, l-Ordni tal-Kavallieri ta' San Juan. Nafu li wara l-Ordni ta' San Juan, Malta wasal Napoleon u Malta ċediet mingħajr ma sparat barra waħda minn din il-fortizza hekk ċentrali u hekk kbira tal-Mediterran. Il-Maltin talbu l-għajnuna tal-Ingliżi biex jeħilsu minn Napoleon u l-Franċiżi. L-Ingliżi ġew Malta u mal-miġja tal-Ingliżi aktar tard bdejna naraw ukoll mhux biss il-bastimenti Ingliżi imma anki l-ajruplani tas-servizzi Ingliżi. Illum serin naraw dokumentarju, partijiet minn dan id-dokumentarju għaliex dokumentarju huwa daqsxejn twil, mhux se narawh kollu llum, se jkollna biċċa li narawha fil-programm tal-ġimgħa d-dieħla, parti minnu, l-aħħar parti narawha l-ġimgħa d-dieħla. Fil-programm tal-lum ħanaraw kif waslu l-Air Force għaw Malta. Hawnhekk Luqa kien biex ngħidlek il-headquarters kien il-post prinċipali ta' Royal Air Force Luqa, Malta.
The three islands of Gozo, Camino and Malta lie almost at the centre point of the Mediterranean Sea.
Historically, there is nowhere on earth like Malta. you know, from very early days, from Neolithic times. There's temples there.
The remains of Neolithic temples and early civilizations can be found on all three islands, dating back to 5200 BC. Malta's strategic location has led it to become an important naval port occupied by the Phoenicians, Romans, Moors, Normans, Sicilians and Spanish.
Malta is so steeped in history. If you've got that type of mind and you're interested in that, I cannot think of a better place to go than to Malta. Not just to learn about what happened to Malta, but basically what happened in the entire Mediterranean area and in Europe.
And of course, very, very famous for the Order of St. John, the Knights of St. John.
In 1522, the Ottoman Empire threatened southwest Europe and Rome. Fearing that Christianity might be crushed, King Charles V of Spain gave Malta to the Knights of St. John. Malta remained under their rule for 275 years. Their first purpose, as Hospitallers, was to provide medical assistance and a safe haven for pilgrims bound to and from the Holy Land. They mounted seaborne attacks on the Ottomans, provoking Suleiman the Magnificent to embark on the first great siege of Malta in May 1565. Suleiman, expecting an easy victory, was defeated 4 months later by the Knights, their fortifications around Malta, and the Maltese people who took up arms to help defeat the Ottomans. After the siege, the Knights built the magnificently opulent city of Valletta, but with more peaceful times in the Mediterranean their purpose declined, and the Knights gradually drifted away from their order, leaving Valletta as their lasting monument.
I came from Salima on the ferry to Valletta, and then I was walking up these little steps. They're very short steps, not easy to walk up. And I said to somebody, I said about these short, I said they must be worn down by so many hundreds and hundreds of years. And he said, no, it's not that. He said the knights would come in with all their full armour, and you try walking up normal steps in full armour. He said, that's hard work. So they made narrow, short steps, so that they could take short steps up with their armour until they could get to their barracks or whatever and strip off.
In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte's fleet en route to Egypt stopped at Malta looking for safe harbour and supplies. The people refused him entry, resulting in a French invasion of the islands.
Napoleon was there for 12 days and laid down the Code Napoleon with the law of Malta. A silly thing happened up at Medina. A cavalry troop of Napoleon's cavalry was going along. There were some kids sitting on a wall, and one of them threw an apple at a cavalryman. French cavalryman, Cuirassier. He pulled his sword and ran the boy through. It's a totally silly act, and killed him. There was an uprising.
This resulted in several failed uprisings and unsuccessful attempts to retake Valletta. The Maltese appealed to the British for their assistance.
Because on his way back from the Battle of Nile, Nelson threw the French out. The Admiralty said, pop in and sort out Malta while you're there, and he did.
Having defeated the French, Lord Nelson took charge of the islands in 1800, when Malta voluntarily became a protectorate of Great Britain, an outpost of empire.
On the name board, going back, Commander British Forces Malta, Admiral Nelson, 1802. And from 1801 to 1979, it was an important British base.
Up until 1869, the development of Malta was slow, but with the opening of the Suez Canal, the importance of the island's location and natural harbours became apparent. It became a British military and naval fortress and headquarters of the Royal Navy's Mediterranean Fleet. During the First World War, Malta became known as the Nurse of the Mediterranean. It returned to its former role as a hospital and convalescent base for large numbers of soldiers wounded in Gallipoli, the Middle East, and other areas of conflict within reach of the island. In addition to the Royal Navy and Army bases, the newest arm of the British forces made its first appearance on Malta.
We'd been operating there since 1918, the Royal Air Force, and before 1918, the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Naval Air Service.
The first airbase to open on Malta was the Royal Naval Air Station at Calafrana, on the southernmost tip of the island. Construction of the station commenced in 1915 after two Royal Navy battleships, HMS Triumph and HMS Majestic, were sunk by German submarines in the Mediterranean. Initially, there was just a slipway and a single shed with 5 small American-built Curtiss H-4 flying boats that were sent out from Felixstowe to patrol Malta's approaches. Later that year, RNAS Calafrana was expanded with a dock and further sheds for the construction of seaplanes shipped out from Britain in kit form. These included more Curtiss H-4s, short Type 184 seaplanes, and FBA Type A flying boats. By the time the Royal Air Force was formed in April 1918, the first land-based planes, de Havilland DH-9s, had arrived on Malta. They were also being used for anti-submarine patrols and were accommodated at and operated from the Royal Malta Golf Club at Marsa. Unlike RAF Calafrana, which had a long and distinguished history, RAF Marsa was short-lived and returned to its former role as the Royal Malta Golf Club in 1919, although it was the focus for flying displays in the years between the wars. Malta's first purpose-built airfield was constructed at Hal Far. Work began in 1922, and it was opened by the Governor of Malta in January 1923. Being Malta's only airfield, it was used by civilian airliners, the Royal Navy and the RAF, which led to it being known as either RAF Hal Far, RNAS Hal Far, HMS Falcon, as well as RAF Malta and Malta Airport. Despite the name, RAF Hal Far, the Fleet Air Arm continued to use what they preferred to call Royal Naval Air Station Hal Far or HMS Falcon as a shore base for carrier-borne aircraft. Following improvements in 1928 to the station's runways, technical and domestic sites, as well as the construction of a new flying boat dock, the Royal Air Force took charge of the renamed RAF Hal Far and began operations with a station flight of Fairey 3Fs. In November 1936, a whirlwind hit Hal Far, causing extensive damage to the Fleet Air Arm aircraft from HMS Hermes and HMS Eagle, as well as the station's RAF aircraft and buildings. This contributed to the deplorable state of Malta's air defences leading up to the outbreak of the Second World War. Elsewhere on the islands, defences were being strengthened and early warning devices set up. Amongst many ingenious ideas tested and evaluated was a plan to build 200-foot sound mirrors, or as the Maltese call it, il winda, the ear, to magnify aircraft engine noise and give early warning to the islanders. Proposed for Singapore, Malta, Gibraltar and Great Britain, only 2 were completed, one in Malta in 1935 and the other at Denge, near Dungeness in Kent. Following unfavourable tests and the very secret development of radar at that time, the sound mirror was abandoned in 1937. Malta's preparations for a possible air war were far from advanced. Work began on RAF Takali in the late 1930s, and it opened in 1939, just prior to the outbreak of war.
Takali, underneath Nina, was the main fighter base, and that was a rough field, if you like, hardcore sort of rolled, but Luqa was hardened, and in 1939-40 it was built as a proper hardened runway that could take fighters and the bigger bombers. Yeah. Wellington was the biggest bomber then, actually, Hamilton or something like that.
RAF Luqa was opened in 1940 and became the headquarters of RAF Mediterranean Command during the Second World War. Built with two dispersed airfields at Safi and Crendi, it was the largest RAF airfield on Malta and was to become vital to the defence of the island in the second siege of Malta.
So Luqa was built in 40. There was Takali, which was the main fighter base, and there was Hull Far, which was the navy base.
Malta's air defences were in a very sorry state when Air Commodore Foster Maynard, Malta's air officer commanding, took charge in January 1940. He found the total strength consisted of 4 Swordfish aircraft, a handful of Sea Gladiators and a radio-controlled Queen Bee. The Gladiators actually belonged to the Royal Navy and were due to be embarked on HMS Glorious and HMS Eagle.
In 1940, HMS Glorious was at Malta and the Germans invaded Norway. HMS Glorious was told to drop everything and get to Norway as quickly as possible.
On the 11th of April 1940, HMS Glorious left Malta. She had re-embarked 9 of 802 Squadron's Sea Gladiators, leaving the remainder at Calafrana.
So Glorious sailed. On the docks it left 4 packing cases in Malta.
In March 1940, Maynard learned that there were 12 Sea Gladiators being stored at Calafrana, 10 of which were awaiting transfer to HMS Eagle. He managed to persuade the Mediterranean Fleet's Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Andrew Cunningham, to let him borrow 4 of these aircraft, which were assembled and delivered to Hull Far to form the new Malta Fighter Flight on the 23rd of April. Almost as soon as they had arrived, the Gladiators were dismantled and repacked, ready to be shipped aboard HMS Eagle to the Middle East. However, following a counter-order on the 29th of April, the Gladiators got a reprieve and were reassembled and operational again by the 4th of May. The Gladiators were flown by volunteer pilots who, with no previous fighter aircraft experience, had to very rapidly adapt themselves to the role of fighter pilot.
At the same time, Mussolini decided to join the war, June 1940. Up to that moment, until he saw that Hitler was winning in France, he didn't join in. Dunkirk happened. He invaded the south of France and started bombing Malta.
On the 10th of June 1940, the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini declared war on Great Britain. With the fall of France and the Allied loss of the French Navy in the Mediterranean, he saw his advantage and started the Italian bombing campaign of Malta, an attack convoy sent to resupply the island. The outdated Hull Far fighters put up a brave defence against the modern machines of the Regia Aeronautica.
Put in the air against the Italian Air Force, the Reggio Aeronautica, who had some lovely aeroplanes, Savoia Marchettis and things, a bit like Alfa Romeos. And climbed up from Hull Far to counter them.
Nobody can be sure when the Gladiators were named Faith, Hope and Charity, but according to the established legend, they were the only 3 fighters defending Malta. In fact, the flight was supplemented by further Gladiators, 2 initially, bringing the total to 6. But due to operational and engineering restrictions at Hull Far, they only operated in 3s. Hence the myth that whenever a flight of 3 Gladiators was seen in the sky, they could only be Faith, Hope and Charity.
3 aircraft kept going up, day after day, in June, July, August, September, 4 months. And the Italians assessed there were 26 aircraft opposing them. And of course they were Faith, Hope and Charity, the famous aircraft.
Today, only 1 Gladiator has survived. Found in a dilapidated state in a quarry at the end of Luqa's runway, the RAF smartened it up and presented it to the people of Malta in September 1943. And today, it is displayed as Faith at the Fort St Elmo National War Museum. In July 1940, an effort was made to supply Malta with more modern fighters to combat the Regia Aeronautica. The aircraft carrier, HMS Argus, flew off a batch of Hawker Hurricanes, which formed into 261 Squadron. These were followed by further reinforcements by carrier, not all of which got close enough to Malta before launching, resulting in serious losses due to insufficient fuel of valuable pilots and Hurricanes. Not all of Malta's defences were in such a poor state. The Lascaris war rooms, located in the secret underground complex of tunnels under Upper Baraka Gardens and the saluting battery, had been used during the Hospitaller period as slave quarters and were greatly enlarged in 1940. Up to 1,000 people worked in these bomb-proof tunnels that housed the operations headquarters and controlled the defence of Malta, as well as naval and air operations in the Mediterranean. The Royal Navy, Air Force and Army each had operations rooms that coordinated with each other and with Malta's anti-aircraft defences, radar stations, radio stations and coastal defences. The Italian siege continued throughout 1940 and into 1941. However, it was becoming apparent that the Italian air and naval forces were limited, and their blitz was not having the desired effect on the morale of the inhabitants of Malta.
The women and children leave their shelter. Malta carries on.
Libya had been under Italian control since 1912, when the territory was split into two colonies, Italian Cyrenaica and Italian Tripolitania. With their declaration of war, it came under attack from the neighbouring British territory, Egypt.
In Egypt, there were three Blenheim squadrons, Blenheim Mark III squadrons, and two Hurricane II squadrons. They were acting in support of the very first excursion into what was then called Cyrenaica.
Mussolini ordered the invasion of Egypt on the 8th of August 1940. Being ill-trained and badly led by their officers, it resulted in a shambolic advance into Egypt that cost the Italians many lives and prisoners.
We were deployed into the desert on war operations because the war started in the Middle East 10th of June. Apprehensive, I said, yeah. There was a feeling in the pit of one's stomach that this was for real. Well, we knew it was for real, but this was the ultimate, this is what we'd been training us. And so off we went, and we were a bit apprehensive. We ran up on the target and we went in line astern. Low level attack, 9 aircraft. And the guy behind us, he came out, he got shot down with a rifle fire. We dropped our bombs successfully on the Allied well, whatever they did. All 8 of us got back and landed, and the skipper turned to me and he said, if that's our fighting, he said, we've had it. That was his actual words. He was lost 2 or 3 days later.
Mussolini requested help from Germany, who formed an expeditionary force called the Africa Corps, commanded by Erwin Rommel. They started to arrive in Tripoli in February 1941.
So we moved up the desert as far as Egela Marshes, and we came back again as far as Tobruk, but Tobruk held out that time. We went back up to the Egela Marshes and a little bit farther this time, and we came back again to Sidi Rezegh, where the murderous battle of Sidi Rezegh took place. And at that time we were still a Hurricane squadron, and we lost all but 2 Hurricanes. We were left with just 2 aircraft.
Malta was the one vital base that continually provided shelter and supplies to the Allied forces heading for North Africa and the Middle East. In an effort to help Malta further defend herself and take the fight to the enemy, Britain sent further long-range aircraft, including Wellington bombers, which were stationed at RAF Luqa. Sunderland flying boats were also sent to be based alongside the RAF Swordfish torpedo bombers and Walrus air-sea rescue aircraft based at Calafrana. These operated in conjunction with the high-speed air-sea rescue launches at Calafrana and at Tavecchia in St Paul's Bay. The Navy also sent further submarines to be based at HMS Talbot, the Royal Navy's submarine base at Manole Island. Being located close to the Axis shipping lanes, the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force launched air, surface and submarine attacks from Malta.
Planes load up their deadly aerial torpedoes, ready to make a dive on any Axis shipping, trying to get supplies through to Libya.
We were stationed in the Middle East, of course, and we operated from Jannicles, I think it was the name of the place, Jannicles station. And eventually we were sent to Malta. You know, because they moved up a bit, the 8th Army moved up and we went across to Malta. We're just doing the same kind of thing, doing a record, looking for shipping and anything that was around, really. We did sing one or two ships, I think. One in particularly. Well, we knew about it, really. We didn't sing it, the Navy sang it, really. They had broken the code, you know. And therefore we knew this ship was coming down slowly. It was rather a large one, and our torpedoes were 18-inch, you know, one big enough it could slow it down but not sink it. So they put a submarine in there, you know, we homed the submarine onto the route it was coming down, and it just stayed there, and we tracked it down with the ASV. And when it got opposite the submarine, we dropped a line of flares on the moon side, and of course it was illuminated. And they sunk into it, burning from stem to stern.
ليرجع ذاك الزمن من جديد.
Rajna l-ewwel parti ta' dan id-dokumentarju. Semmorru għal ftit riklami, inkunu magħkom minn hawn u ftit ieħor.
Album ritratti lura fiż-żmien.
Lura Fiz-Zmien.
Pajjiż mod ieħor milli nafih. Titħabbab miegħu bla ma trid u kemm nixtieq impara l-ftit li jerġa' dak iż-żmien mill-ġdid. Li jerġa' dak iż-żmien mill-ġdid.